be time for me to make a bad joke. We're starting on what we used to call poets' time. Okay. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome, 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 welcome. And thank you so much for being here to honor Brad Watson. I'm going to start with some thank yous. I'm going to say a very few words. I'm going to introduce all four of our guest readers, and then they will read from Brad's work. Then we will have a little panel conversation and some Q&A with you guys. And then we will disperse. There are some books for sale. They can be signed outside by all of our visitors, and there's food to enjoy as well. So that's kind of how I think and where I think things are headed. But if there are fun disruptions, I invite those, particularly if they're Watson related. So again, thank you. Thank you to Dean Kaskvenold and the staff of UW Libraries. Truly, this event would not have been possible without you guys. Thank you, Peter Parolin and the staff of the Honors College. Your service on behalf of the curiosity of your students is an inspiration, and we are grateful for it. Thank you, Molly McCauley Brown, and my colleagues in the Creative Writing Program and the English Department for so much behind-the-scenes work to make this happen. Thank you, Jennifer Kirk and Michaela Jones, for the publicity and social media support. It is so nice to have young people help you on this stuff, and they are really good. Thank you also, Wiocast and Cameron, for filming this so it can be streamed far and wide. We have people on the other side of the globe joining us right now, and later we believe this will be posted on YouTube. So that's, yeah, I agree. And thank you most of all, Nell Hanley, for coming back to Laramie to be with us today. Brad Watson was a friend of mine and a colleague in the creative writing program here for 15 years. The program will have its 20th anniversary this next fall. He was an enormous, witty, inspiring talent, a crack storyteller, a generous and welcoming teacher, and a wicked good cook with a Dutch oven. He admired dogs, and many of them admired him back. He knew how to make you laugh. He especially knew how to make me laugh. He had a genius for what Caleb Johnson described this morning as slipping into the mind of a story with his students and helping them move those stories to new places. He hated bureaucracy and paperwork. That's the English department chittering over there. And he never quite gave up on Mississippi State football. Thank you. Honestly, I miss him every time I set foot in Hoyt Hall, and that's the truth. His office is still empty to this day. It's not empty, but it's filled with his spirit, but there's no physical person in there right now. He treated that entire building like an enormous front porch on which he might swap greetings with anyone and everyone at any time. I have a lot to say about Brad, but today I'm grateful to be able to listen to his friends and former students read from his posthumous collection of new and selected stories, There Is Happiness, which was published by W.W. Norton in July. Today, Brad Watson, with his unique and memorable voice on the page, will speak for himself. Just a show of hands. Those of you who are former students of Brad Watson, would you just thank you? Thank you for being here. And Burge, I know you're watching from California. Those of you who were friends of Brad, and we can define that widely, did you ever have a drink with him at Front Street or? Okay, thank you. So that's pretty much everybody in the room. Good job. Let me introduce our guests. They will read in this order. Joy Williams, Kali Fajardo-Anstine, Jenny Tinghui Zhang, and Caleb Johnson. Joy Williams is the author of 5 novels, including The Quick and the Dead and Harrow, 5 collections of stories, and the essay collection Ill Nature. Among her many, many honors are the Library of Congress Prize, For American fiction, the Kirkus Prize for Fiction, the Hadada Award from the Paris Review, for which he got the coolest, weirdest statue ever, and the Strauss Living Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. I believe Joy had the Hadada, the statue came to the Centennial Library marked general delivery, right? So, I mean, Centennial Post Office, so it's an interesting thing. Joy first visiting Wyoming at Brad's invitation in 2008, I think, as part of UW's Eminent Writer in Residence program, and she has kind of thankfully never completely left us. She currently lives in Arizona and for part of the year in the Centennial Valley of Wyoming. Kali Fajardo-Anstine is the nationally best-selling author of the novel Women of Light and the widely acclaimed short story collection Sabrina and Karina, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and winner of the American Book Award. She is a 2023 Guggenheim Fellow and the 2021 recipient of the Addison M. Metcalf Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Fajardo-Anstine is the 2022 to 2024 Endowed Chair in Creative Writing at Texas State. She's from Denver, although she more than occasionally, thank goodness, hangs her hat here in Laramie. She received her MFA from UW in 2013. Jenny Tinghui Zhang is a Chinese-American writer and author of the international bestseller Four Treasures of the Sky, which has been translated into 12 languages and shortlisted for multiple prizes. Her shorter work has appeared in The Cut, The New York Times, Texas Highways, and The Rumpus. She was just last year selected by the National Book Foundation as a 5 under 35 honoree and has received support from Yaddo, Kundiman, Vana Voices, Tin House, and UW, where she received her MFA in 2019. Her next novel, Superfan, is forthcoming from Flatiron Books in 2026. Jenny currently lives in Austin, Texas. Caleb Johnson is the author of the novel Treeborn, which received an honorable mention for the Southern Book Prize and was longlisted for the Crooks Corner Book Prize. His work has been cited in Best American Essays and appears in Southern Living, The Wall Street Journal, and Garden and Gun, among other venues. Caleb grew up in Arley, Alabama, studied journalism at that school in Tuscaloosa, and earned an MFA from UW in 2013. He's received fellowships from the Sewanee Writers Conference, the Longleaf Writers Conference, and the Gentile Foundation. He currently teaches at the University of South Alabama and lives in Mobile with his wife, the writer Irina Zorov, also an alum and published novelist herself, and their son, Felix. So, our guests are going to read some excerpts from Brad's book, and then we'll be back and do a little Q&A. So again, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to all of us who knew Brad. Joey.
Well, thanks for being here. This is so wonderful. I miss Brad so much. He's such a fantastic writer. And I'm going to read the entirety of the story, which is Bill, which is going to break your heart, which all stories should do. So this is Bill. Wilhelmina, 87, lived alone in the same town as her 2 children, but she rarely saw them. Her main companion was a trembling poodle she'd had for about 15 years, named Bill. You never hear of dogs named Bill. Her husband, in his decline, had bought him, named him after a boy he'd known in the Great War, and then wouldn't have anything to do with him. He'd always been Wilhelmina's dog. She could talk to Bill in a way that she couldn't talk to anyone else, not even her own children, not even her husband, now nearly a vegetable out at King's Daughters Rest Home on the old highway. She rose in the blue candlelit morning to go see him about the dog, who was doing poorly. She was afraid of being completely alone. There were her children and their children, and even some great-grandchildren, but that was neither here nor there for Wilhelmina. They were all in different worlds. She drove her immaculate ocean blue Delta 88 out to the home and turned up the long, barren drive. The tall, naked trunks of a few old pines lined the way, their sparse tops distant as clouds. Wilhelmina pulled into the parking lot and took 2 spaces so she'd have plenty of room to back out when she left. She paused for a moment to check herself in the rearview mirror and adjusted the broad-brimmed hat she wore to hide the thinning spot on top of her head. Her husband, Howard, lay propped up and twisted in his old velour robe, his mouth open, watching TV. His thick white hair stood in a matted knot on his head like a child's. "What?" he said when she walked in. "What did you say?" "I said, 'Hello,'" Wilhelmina replied, though she'd said nothing. She sat down. "I came to tell you about Bill, Howard. He's almost completely blind now, and he can't go to the bathroom properly. The veterinarian says he's in pain, and he's not going to get better, and I should put him to sleep." Her husband had tears in his eyes. "Poor old Bill," he said. "I know," Wilhelmina said, welling up herself now. "I'll miss him so. I loved him at Bellow Wood. He was all bloody and walking around," Howard said. "They shot off his nose and the mirrors are gone." He picked up the remote box and held the button down, the channels thumping past like the muted thud of an ancient machine gun. Wilhelmina dried her tears with a Kleenex from her handbag and looked up at him. "Oh, fiddle," she said. "Breakfast time," said an attendant, a slim, copper-colored man whose blue smock was tailored at the waist and flared over his hips like a suit jacket. He set down the tray and held his long, delicate hands before him as if for inspection. He turned to Wilhelmina. "Would you like to feed your husband, ma'am?" "Heavens, no," Wilhelmina said. She shrank back as if he intended to touch her with those hands. When the attendant held a spoonful of oatmeal up to her husband's mouth, he lunged for it, his old gray tongue out, and slurped it down. "Oh, he's ravenous today," said the attendant. Wilhelmina, horrified, felt for a moment as if she were losing her mind and had wandered into the stranger's room by mistake. She clutched her purse and slipped out into the hall. "I'm going," she called faintly, and hurried out to her car, which sat on the cracked surface of the parking lot like an old beached yacht. The engine groaned, turned over, and she steered down the long drive and onto the highway without even a glance at the traffic. A car passed her on the right, up in the grass, horn blaring, and an enormous dump truck cleaved the air to her left like a thunderclap. She would pay them no mind. When she got home, the red light on her answering machine, a gift from her son, was blinking. It was him on the tape. "I got your message about Bill, Mama. I'll take him to the vet in the morning if you want. Just give me a call. Bye-bye now." "No, I can't think about it," Wilhelmina said. Bill was on his cedar-filled pillow in the den. He looked around for her, his nose up in the air. "Over here, Bill," Wilhelmina said loudly, for the dog's deaf ears. She carried him a milk-bone biscuit, for his teeth were surprisingly good. He sniffed the biscuit, then took it carefully between his teeth, bit off a piece, and chewed. "Good boy, Bill. Good Bill." Bill didn't finish the biscuit. He laid his head down on the cedar pillow and breathed heavily. In a minute, he got up and made his halting, wobbling way toward his water bowl in the kitchen, but hit his head on the door jamb and fell over. "Oh, Bill, I can't stand it," Wilhelmina said, rushing to him. She stroked his head until he calmed down, and then she dragged him gently to his bowl where he lapped and lapped until she had to refill it. He drank so much. He kept drinking. "Kidneys," Wilhelmina said, picking up the bowl. "That's enough, boy." Bill nosed around for the water bowl, confused. He tried to squat, legs trembling, and began to whine. Wilhelmina carried him out to the backyard, set him down, and massaged his kidneys the way the vet had shown her. And finally, a little trickle ran down Bill's left hind leg. He tried to lift it. "Good old Bill," she said. "You try, don't you?" She carried him back in and dried his leg with some paper towels. "I guess I'd do anything for you, Bill," she said. But she had made up her mind. She picked up the phone and called her son. It rang 4 times, and then his wife's voice answered. "You reached 281, she began. "I know that," Wilhelmina muttered. "We can't come to the phone right now." Wilhelmina thought that sort of message was rude. If they were there, they could come to the phone. "Leave your message after the beep." "I guess you better come and get Bill in the morning," Wilhelmina said, and hung up. Wilhelmina's husband had been a butcher, and Katrina, the young widow who'd succeeded him at the market, still brought meat by the house every Saturday afternoon. Steaks, roasts, young chickens, stew beef, soup bones, whole hams, bacon, pork chops, ground chuck. Once she even brought a leg of lamb. Wilhelmina couldn't possibly eat it all, so she stored most of it in her deep freeze. She went out to the porch and gathered as much from the deep freeze as she could carry, dumped it into the kitchen sink like a load of kindling, then pulled her cookbooks from the cupboard and sat down at the kitchen table. She began looking up recipes that had always seemed too complex for her, dishes that sounded vaguely exotic, chose 6 of the most interesting she could find, and copied them onto a legal pad. Then she made a quick trip to the grocery store to find the items she didn't have on hand, buying odd spices like saffron and coriander, and not just produce, but shallots and bright red bell peppers and a bulb of garlic cloves as big as her fist. Bill had always liked garlic. Back home, she spread all the meat out on the counter, the chops and steaks and ham, the roasts and the bacon, some Italian sausage she'd found, some boudin that had been there for ages, and even a big piece of fish fillet. She chopped the sweet peppers, the shallots, ground the spices. The more she worked, the less she thought of the recipes, until she became a marvel of culinary innovativeness, combining oils and spices and herbs and meats into the most savory dishes you can imagine. Master William's sirloin surprise, ham o' Bill, Bill's leg of lamb with bacon, chestnuts, Bill's broiled red snapper with butter and crab, bloody boudin a la Bill, and one she decided to call simply sausage chops. She fired up her oven, lit every eye on her stove, and cooked it all just as if she was serving the King of France instead of her old French poodle. Then she arranged the dishes on her best china, cut the meat into bite-sized pieces, and served them to her closest friend, her dog. She began serving early in the evening, letting Bill eat just as much or as little as he wanted from each dish. "This ought to wake up your senses, Bill." Indeed, Bill's interest was piqued. He ate, rested, ate a little more of this dish and that. He went back to the leg of lamb, nibbling the bacon chestnuts off its sides. Wilhelmina kept gently urging him to eat, and as the evening wore on, Bill's old cataract eyes gradually seemed to reflect something. It seemed like quiet suffering, not his usual burden, but the luxurious suffering of the glutton. He had found a strength beyond himself, and so he kept bravely on, forcing himself to eat until he could not swallow another bite, and lay carefully beside the remains of his feast and slept. Wilhelmina sat quietly in a kitchen chair and watched from her window as the sun edged up behind the trees, red and molten, like the swollen, dying star of an ancient world. She was so tired that her body felt weightless, as if she'd already left it hollow of her spirit. It seemed that she had lived such a long time. Howard had courted her in a horse-drawn wagon. An entire world of souls had disappeared in their time, and other nameless souls had filled their spaces. Some one of them had taken Howard's soul. Bill had rolled onto his side in sleep, his tongue slack on the floor, his poor stomach as round and taut as a honeydew melon. After such a gorging, there normally would be hell to pay. But Wilhelmina would not allow that to happen. "I'll take you to the doctor myself, old Bill," she said. As if in response, a faint and easy dream howl escaped Bill's throat. Someone calling another in the big woods, across empty fields and deep silent stands of trees. Ooh, it went, high and soft. Ooh. Wilhelmina's heart thickened with emotion. Her voice was deep and rich with it. "Ooh," she called softly to Bill's sleeping ears. "Ooh," Bill called again, a little stronger, and she responded, "Ooh," their pure, wordless language like echoes in the morning air. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joy. That was so beautiful. Thank you. My name is Kali Fajardo-Anstine. I was a student of Brad's from 2011 to 2013, and I'm going to read from his short story, Visitation. I believe this was the first story of Brad's that I had ever read. Before I was accepted here at the University of Wyoming MFA program, I had actually been living in San Diego, and I was enrolled in another program, but I dropped out, and I've heard that it was Brad actually who thought that my work showed some strength and I could come live here with everybody in Laramie. So, and part of this story, all of the story is set near where I lived in San Diego. "Come sit," she said. "Don't be afraid." He was afraid. But the woman was so still, and the look on her face he could now make out in the shadows was one of calm appraisal. Something about this kept him from retreating. She slowly raised a hand and patted the pool chair next to her, and Loomis sat. For a moment the woman looked at him, and unable not to, he looked at her. She was unexpectedly, oddly attractive. Her eyes were indeed very dark, set far apart on her broad face. In this light, her fierce nose was strange and alarming, almost erotic. "Are you a gypsy?" Loomis blurted out without thinking. She stared at him a second before smiling and chuckling deep in her throat. "No, I'm not a gypsy," she said, her eyes moving quickly from side to side in little shiftings looking into his. "We are American. My people come from France." Loomis said nothing. "But I can tell your future," she said, leaning her head back slightly to look at him down her harrowing nose. "Let me see your hand." She took Loomis's wrist and pulled his palm toward her. He did not resist. "Have you ever had someone read your palm?" Loomis shook his head. "I don't really want to know my future," he said. "I'm not a very optimistic person." I understand, the woman said. You're unsettled. It's too dark here to even see my palm, Loomis said. No, there's enough light, the woman said. And finally, she took her eyes from Loomis's and looked down at his palm. He felt relieved enough to be released from that gaze to let her continue. And something in him was relieved, too, to have someone else consider his future, someone aside from himself. It could be worse, after all, than his own predictions. She hung her head over his palm and traced the lines with a long fingernail pressed into the fleshy parts. Her thick hair trickled the edges of his hand and wrist. After a moment, much sooner than Loomis would have expected, she spoke. It's not the future you see in a palm, she said, still studying his. It's a person's nature. From this, of course, one can tell much about a person's tendencies. She looked up, still gripping his wrist. This tells us much about where a life may have been and where it may go. She bent over his palm again, traced one of the lines with the fingernail. There are many breaks in your heart line. You are a creature of disappointment. I suspect others in your life disappoint you. She traced a different line. You're a dreamer. You're an idealist, possibly. Always disappointed by ordinary life, which, of course, is boring and ugly. She laughed that soft, deep chuckle again and looked up, startling Loomis anew with the directness of her gaze. People are so fucking disappointing, eh? She uttered a seductive grunt that loosened something in Loomis's groin. It was true. No one had ever been good enough for him, even the members of his immediate family, and especially himself. Anger, disappointment, the woman said, so common. But it may be that they've worn you down. The drinking, smoking, no real energy, no passion. Loomis pulled against her grip just slightly, but she held on with strong fingers around his wrist. Then she lowered Loomis's palm to her broad lap and leaned in closer, speaking more quietly. I see you with the little boy. He's your child? Loomis nodded. He felt suddenly alarmed, fearful. He glanced up and his heart raced when he thought he saw the boy standing on the balcony looking out. It was only the potted plant there. He wanted to dash back to the room, but he was rooted to the chair, to the gypsy with her thin, hard fingers about his wrist. This is no vacation, I suspect. It's terrible to see your child this way, in a motel. Loomis nodded. You're angry with this child's mother for forcing you to be here. Yet, I would venture it was you who left her for another woman, a beautiful woman, eh? She ran the tip of a nail down one of the lines in his palm. There was a cruel smile on her impossible face. A woman who once again you believed to be something she was not. She was a dream, the woman said, and she has disappeared. Poof, like any dream. He felt suddenly embarrassingly close to tears. A tight lump swelled in his throat. And now you have left her too, or she has left you. Because, and here the woman paused, shook Loomis's wrist gently as if to revive his attention, and indeed he had been drifting in his grief. Because you are a ghost. Walking between two worlds, you know? She shook his wrist again, harder, and Loomis looked up at her, his vision of her there in the shadows blurred by his tears. She released his wrist and sat back in her chair, exhaled as if she had been holding her breath and closed her eyes, as if they sat there for a minute or two while Loomis waited for the emotion that had surged up in him. $20, the woman said, her eyes still closed. And when Loomis said nothing, she opened her eyes again. Now her gaze was flat, no longer intense, but she held it on him. $20, she said. For the reading, this is my fee.
I'm Jenny, and I was a student here in the MFA program and a student of Brad's from 2017 to 2019, and I haven't been back to Laramie since. So I wish it were under different circumstances, but it's been really special getting to remember Brad through his stories and through all of our stories and memories of him. So I'm going to be reading from the middle of Agnes of Bob. Laura, Agnes said. Laura. Laura pressed on the brake pedal and looked at her. Why don't you use the side mirror? Agnes said. Laura looked at her blankly. If you just keep your left fender close to the bushes on that side, you'll be all right, Agnes said. Laura said, I couldn't see the rest of the car if I did that. You don't have to see the whole car, Agnes said. Can you see the whole car when you're moving ahead? If you keep it close to the bushes on your side, the other side will take care of itself. I do all right, Laura said. Well, I can't use the side mirror. I never have. Laura, it's just easier, Agnes started to say. But Laura's toe had strayed from the brake pedal and the car's high idle propelled them backwards. Agnes, looking into the mirror on her side, thought for a moment that they would make it clear out of the driveway and into the street by accident. But then Laura realized what was happening and yanked the wheel, and the car jumped the curb and plowed into the bank of azaleas with a paint-rending screech. Laura kept one hand on the gear shift, pulled the stick clink-clank into drive, and the car shot forward into the driveway and jerked to a stop. Look at that, Laura said. Agnes, will you just let me drive? In the end, Agnes got out and waited on the sidewalk until Laura had gotten the car into the street. Then she got in and they drove at Laura's steady 15 miles per hour pace to the pool. Laura took a couple of spaces near the gate, put the broad straw garden hat back onto her head, and they walked on in. Well, here we are, Laura said. You go on in. I'll just find somewhere to sit down. I'm going to get some sun before I swim, Agnes said. Why don't you sit over there under the awning and get yourself some iced tea? I'll take one of those loungers over there and stretch out. Well, that sounds good, Laura said. I don't see how you can stand that sun. I'm glad I wore my hat. She adjusted the hat and began working her fingers out of the white cotton gloves as she made her way over to the refreshment area. Agnes walked down to the deck behind the diving boards, spread her Panama City beach towel onto one of the cedar chaise lounge chairs, and eased herself down. This was the last time she'd ever go anywhere with Laura. Lord, what an old biddy. She decided not to fool with the suntan lotion. She hoped Laura wouldn't wander off and strand her, or worse yet, totter off and fall into the pool and drown. She decided to alert the lifeguard to that possibility. He was a strong-looking boy and very capable, she was sure. She looked at him, sitting up in his high chair, twirling his silver whistle. She got up and went over to the chair. Young man, she said. The lifeguard looked down at her. He wore black sunglasses and she couldn't see his eyes. Yes, ma'am, he said. Would you keep an eye on that elderly lady over at the refreshment stand? I'm afraid she might wander off and fall into the pool. The lifeguard looked down at her for a moment, then over in Laura's direction. The lady with the big hat and the sunglasses, ma'am? Agnes looked and saw that Laura had pulled out her pair of giant, squared, geriatric sunglasses and put them on. That's her, she said. She looked up at him a moment longer as he put the silver whistle to his lips and blew two short notes, like a songbird's call, and nodded to some action out in the pool. He looked like a Greek god on the mount, like Neptune. I thank you, Agnes said, and went back to her lounge chair. Students from the college lay on their towels along the pool's edge. It was very hot, and every now and then one of the girls got up and stepped down the pool ladder into the water, holding her hair up on top of her head until the water touched the back of her neck, then climbed out of the water, still holding her hair. Some girls liked to wet their heads, arching their necks back and lowering their long, straight hair into the pool. The boys behind their dark glasses watched the girls lower themselves into the pool and emerge with water sparkling on their oiled bodies, then watched them walk to their towels again. Agnes watched them all. They were all very nearly naked and all brown as the glazed donuts Pops used to bring home from Shipley's on Sunday mornings after his early drive to smoke his Sunday cigar. She thought about the students having sex. She knew they all did these days and wondered if they had to get to know one another before they did it, or if they just did it casual as dogs without a thought. She remembered the taste of the hot, soft donuts Pops would bring home, and it made her so restless she sat up straight in the lounge chair. Laura was still in the shade at the refreshment stand, fanning herself with a magazine. Agnes got up and eased herself over the pool's edge, let go, and sank to the bottom. The water sent a great shock of cool through her body. She felt immersed in a great big glass of ice water. She looked around. Everything was green and bright. Way off down at the other end, someone dove in and swam across, just thrashing arms and legs. She could see the legs of children dancing around at the shallow end. A cloud sailed over, made all jumpy by the waves. She could see people walk along the pool's edge, their bodies broken into pieces and quivering like jello. The legs and bottom and shoulders and one arm of a girl came slowly down the ladder and slowly climbed back out, jerking like something big outside the water was taking her bite by bite. Agnes felt fine not breathing, as if there was a great supply of air in her lungs. She'd always had wonderful lung capacity. At some point, she thought, it seemed like a body would simply stop needing to take in so much air, stop needing to breathe all the time. Another girl came partially down the ladder, dipped her long hair back into the pool, and then walked back up into the air. Agnes felt as if they all belonged to another world, too thin and insubstantial to sustain her. And the one she was in, her world here deep in the clear green water, was much more pleasurable, much more peaceful. She remembered a dream, swimming in the ocean in a vast school of swift metallic fish, their eyes all around her, the feeling she got eye to eye with the fishes, and their effortless speed and flashing tails. She felt something stir in her, growing until she felt filled with it. Her chest ached with it. Saturday nights, Pops would cook their meals. He loved to fry fish, take Bob out to the lake and get on a bream bed. Pops would come home with a stringer, a mess, wet fish flopping and mouths groping for air. Made her chest ache watching them. Pops would clean the bream out back, throw Bob a fish head, Bob tossing fish heads around the yard like balls. She was on the brink of a wonderful vision, as if in a moment she would know what Pops had seen as he passed through his own heart and a pile of washed foundry sand into the next world. She thought she heard the distant trill of a bird and looked up as a crash of bubbles shot down from the surface. The bubbles cleared and she saw it was the lifeguard, his dark and curly hair about his face like a nest of water serpents. His eyes were a clear blue revelation, opened wide and upon her. She held out her arms. He came forward and held her and pulled her gently upward. Her hands felt the muscles moving powerfully along his back. She thought that he must have wings, this angel, and he would take her on some beautiful journey.
Thank y'all so much for being here. I feel really honored to be here tonight with everyone, and to be a part of what I think is probably the coolest reading lineup I'll ever be a part of, with Joy and Kali and Jenny, and then reading Brad's work. I don't know, for me it doesn't get too much better than this. And I was Brad's student same time as Kali. We were in the same cohort, 2011 to 2013, and then Brad became my friend and remained my mentor. Until his last day, and he did so much for me, so I'm very honored to be able to be here and celebrate his work in this special place. I'm going to read from a piece that was excerpted from a novel Brad was working on. The novel was he was calling The Man-Eater of Marigold Park, and this story is called The Zookeeper and the Leopard. I'm going to read the end of it where we're in the leopard's point of view, because I love how Brad wrote about animals, and there's so much. He wrote beautifully about dogs, right? But this is interesting because it's a story about a cat. And so it's maybe odd we'll end with this, but I wanted to read this ending. And all you really need to know is that there's this zookeeper named Walston, and Walston has got himself in a not so good situation with a leopard. So normally the leopard would stash the kill in a nearby tree for safekeeping and return to it later when he was hungry again. But he knew he would not return to this place. He dragged the zookeeper outside the jaguar's feeding den, not wanting to eat where the other animal ate, and fed on one of the zookeeper's legs for a while, then rested. He sniffed the air, reaffirmed the absence of any other threats. He bit down into a firm grip on the back of the zookeeper's neck and swung him around, knocking the head on the open cage door and inadvertently slamming into it. Dragging the zookeeper's body between his legs, he padded from the feeding area into the open air of the zoo, now grown silent after the general commotion stirred by the noise he made making the kill and by the scent of blood that had permeated the air. There was a near full moon up, not ideal, yet nothing seemed to miss. He paused to lift his tail and mark the entrance to Carnivore Alley, then made his way along the footpath to the zoo's boundaries, taking his time, as apparently calm as only a large cat can be. His passage caused a great pall to fall over the cages and pens and pits, with the monkeys and chimps and gorillas quietly ascending to the tops of their perches in the far corners, and the small animals zipping into their holes, and the large herbivores shuffling to the far edges of their areas, and the other cats going still, half crouched, eyes dilated, watching the progress of this beast, who must be a ghost cat to have entered the world of the human beings, strolling down their paths, breathing their air. And then the other cats began to pace, growling low in frustration and envy and confusion. The large herbivores trotted en masse hither and thither, spooking one another until they fairly stampeded from one end of their pits to the other. The monkeys and apes began leaping about and chattering, then screeching. The birds fluttered and flew about madly, knocking against the wire walls and ceilings of their aviaries. The iguanas and snakes flicked their tongues all about their glass little caves, fetching particles that whispered, "Leopard." And the hyenas knocked one another in their restless, jealous avarice until one attacked another, and they became a chaotic, bloody, high-yelping melee of black and brown fur and blood on pink-torn flesh and bloody grimace. By the time the leopard, the zookeeper's carcass firmly in the grip of his jaws, leapt to the top of the hurricane fence on the zoo's south side, dropped the zookeeper's carcass onto the ground on the other side, picked it up again, and forded the creek there. By then, the zoo's 10 acres with its rich array of animal and bird life, its cool green flora of oaks and mimosas and sycamores and great stands of rustling bamboo, the flowering fruit trees, azaleas and camellias along its manicured paths, the shrubbery thick with heavy-scented gardenias, honeysuckle, magnolias had blossomed into an unspeakably beautiful garden of madness. The leopard its envoy to the sleeping city, his heart singing with lust for prowling, stalking, watching, killing, and the godlike invisibility of observation from the dense-leaved limbs of sturdy, deciduous trees. But that would come later in his new freedom, which already felt as natural as if he'd never lost it, after a couple days of leisurely feeding on his kill. The leopard had not tasted fresh meat or warm blood for a long time. He had an intense and instinctive craving for the rich blood and tissue of the organs. Though it was more work, the combination of this craving and his long-cultivated hatred of the zookeeper compelled him to crack open the skull and devour the brain with relish. After raking out the viscera, he ate the heart, but the liver was fouled. He had slept in the higher branches of a massive live oak between the fairways of holes 1 and 3 at the country club, and late in the afternoon watched with intense curiosity the golfers walking by, stopping to swing at the balls, calling to one another. Once, a short, sturdy woman pulling a little cart behind her stopped right beneath the tree, hunted around for a ball, found it, hit, and walked on, pulling her cart. The leopard had been tempted to leap down on her just for the sheer fun of it, as leopards will sometimes do. But there were other golfers nearby, and he didn't want the trouble of dealing with them. His meal was almost digested, but not entirely just yet. Finally, night fell on the last golfers, where only occasional gabbles of laughter and speech erupting small and distant from the lights at the bar and grill beside the 18th hole. The leopard made his way carefully down to the largest lower limbs of the live oak, leapt down into the grass of the rough, and stood there testing the air and waving his tail lazily back and forth. He was curious about the bar and grill, so he began to walk in that direction, in no hurry, a sleek and shadowed solitary figure in the silvery light. He paused on the fairway of the long, silent number 5 hole and made a mighty defecation, scratched a clump of grass at it, then went on his way. The large scat lay steaming in the wet, glinting, close-clipped grass. It was the zookeeper, of course, some facet of his vestigial consciousness. Relieved, sorry. Some of these lines, y'all, it's just, it was the zookeeper, of course, some facet of his vestigial consciousness, relieved at the sensation of relative light and air, at the oddly, fleetingly familiar sense of cut grass and irrigation water, of the way a waxing moon might indicate itself so softly, so infinitely, to the blissfully closed lids of one's eyes through a window open at evening when he was a child. For it has been written and is true that more than any of the other great predators, the leopard lives only in the moment, not in memory, not in any world other than the one he walks through just then, and he takes it all in, but it is as God might take it all in, as if it is all his, as if it all exists only for him in that moment, and any other mode of existence is literally inconceivable. For the creature with the ability to live as such, every moment is timeless as the ages. It is a kind of immortality in truth, as close as any living creature in this world may achieve. Thus, they are gods.
Thank you. Another round for our readers. I think Caleb's right. We will not see a lineup like this again in some time. I'm going to ask Brad's former students to come up, and they're going to share a memory or two or a comment or two about Brad as teacher and mentor, and then we'll take some questions. If anybody needs to come and go, please feel free to do that. But if Kali and Jenny and Caleb will come up to the front, it'd be great. And I'll need you to use your professorial voices, but I know you have them. So, and if the sound's not good, let us know, and we'll have them come up this way. I don't need to offer any prompts. You guys are ready, right?
Well, you can tee up one for us, you know.
Well, I did discover today in one of my classes that Jenny was on the infamous tour with Brad's class where they attempted to find the meadow memorialized in James Galvin's book. Haha, see, Courtney's laughing already. I think they ended up in Bellevue, Colorado, which is not, it's on the wrong side of where they wanted to be. But can you want to talk a little bit about Brad as experiential learning?
So we had just read James Galvin's The Meadow, and Brad had this vision that we would go and find this meadow, because I think it was somewhere like in between the Colorado and Wyoming border, I believe. And he also told us that he had like a hand-drawn map that an optometrist down in downtown Laramie had given him. And I don't remember what their relationship was, but I don't think it was his optometrist. I don't know. Anyway, so he had this like this slip of a map, I suppose, and he was driving his Nissan Xterra. I remember it was like that dark blue Nissan Xterra, and we were in, I believe it was Reese Sawyer. He was a first year at the time. We were in his pickup truck, and I remember this was a day that it just felt like tumultuous even by Wyoming standards. So the skies were quite dark. I believe it began raining as we were heading out, and the road to this meadow was not like a nice paved road. It was very much like an off-road situation. And Brad was in his Nissan Xterra and he was doing fine, but for some reason he was driving so fast. Like to the point where you're kind of wondering, do you want us to follow you, or are you? And we're in Reese's pickup truck, 5 of us squished in, and Reese tells us he doesn't have 4-wheel or all-wheel drive situation. And we're looking outside, and it's raining, and the mud is happening, and someone brings like some strips of beef jerky that they have that we can subsist on if it's stranded out here. And we just followed Brad through this winding path. And finally, I think we kept stopping, and Brad kept saying, well, this is not the meadow. Keep going, and Brad would get out and be like, no, this is not it. And then I think finally we reached a spot that seemed like it could be it, and I think Brad was a little suspicious if it was actually it, but that was the thing I took away from this experience, other than the fact that Brad was willing to do this trip when we had an evening event with an author visiting in town, and we were indeed late to this event. It was that Brad had that like childlike, mischievous desire to find and explore, and I think that's what I admired most about him, and that comes across in his stories, of course, and that came across in the way that he treated our stories in workshop, was just this never-ending quest of like, no, this isn't it, this isn't it.
Yeah.
We survived.
Colleague, Caleb?
Well, what I remember, so when I came out on my recruiting visit in April, the year before I started, Kali picked me up at the airport in Denver, and we rode up together to Laramie, and I'd never traveled this far west before. And I remember one of the activities planned on the recruiting visit was Brad was going to give us a tour of town.
Oh, really?
Were you
I don't have a memory
I thought
of
you
this,
were, but
it's,
anyway, so Brad, and that was just like, Brad gives students a tour of town. And so he pulled up in the Cadillac, and I was just like, I knew Brad's work, and I knew people who knew him, but I was out here in this place like I'd never been before, and this Cadillac pulls up in front of the hotel, and like 4 or 5 of us piled in it, sort of like piled in the back, and it quickly became clear to me that there was no tour involved, and Brad was just going to drive around Laramie, sort of like telling us stories and asking us questions about ourselves for forever, but it was just one of those times too where I was like, it was always going to be fun, right? And Brad was always going to tell stories, and he was always going to make sure the students had a good time and felt welcome there, and that's how it was in the classroom and out in that way. And so I just remember riding around Laramie in this old Cadillac, dragging the street basically because there were so many of us piled in there.
Well, and he knew, right? This is like, President Seidel, if you're listening, this is what it takes to recruit and retain. Genius at that.
I don't think I was in the Cadillac I would remember. So, I have a lot of like these just wonderful moments with Brad where they're very illuminating for the rest of your life. And I remember, so my office in Hoyt was right across the hall from Brad's. And one time he came over and he had a royalty check for $12.08. And he waved it around in front of me and he said, someday you can be an author. And I thought, no one had ever taken me so seriously that they thought I would ever get a royalty check. So that was a big deal. But there was there was another really funny memory though, is the publishing class. Did you take the publishing class? Yeah. So this was like, we were using a speaker phone, a conference phone in the middle of the cottage house to call New York City publishing. And there was always like hijinks would ensue, but I remember there was an author, and I since like have met her, and I never told her I remember this, but she thought we were going to Zoom. Like she was just ready to Skype, but I think we Skyped more back then. And she had all this makeup on, and she looked really beautiful. And then he was like, "Oh no, we're not doing video. We're actually going to put you on the conference call." And I could just see the disappointment that she'd spent all that time getting ready. But my favorite advice that Brad ever gave me, my first workshop story, I hadn't gotten my letter back from him yet, and he seemed really stressed that I was upset that I had not gotten the letter. But I didn't know you're supposed to get the letter like when you're in class, so I had no idea I hadn't been shortchanged the letter. But he kept seeing me and reminding me in the hallways, he's getting the letter to me, he's getting the letter to me. And so finally one day in the Hoyt stairwell, he sees me. He's going down and I'm going up, and the sun was just like blasting on him, and he just looked so heavenly. And he said, I have your letter, but I want you to know the story's not ready yet. You have to keep dreaming about it. And to this day, when I tell students you need to dream a little bit about your stories, that doesn't connect right away. But I think about that all the time, that Brad was a writer and an artist who used the imagination in that way and who rested in dreams like that. So I always carry that memory with me.
We'll take a few questions, and anyone online, I think you can post those, and they'll come to my email account, I'm told, so we'll see how that works. Questions, comments? Also, Brad, thank you, Kelly.
No, so I'm really fascinated by this notion of dreams, because when I'm really into a project, I dream about it. But that's not something that, at least in my field, people talk about. So I'm wondering if anybody can talk about, their own experiences with dreams and their writing.
It's not really part of my process, but I guess what I think about with Brad, like when you tell that story, Kali, the kind of teacher he was when I was here was and I think it can be frustrating for students at times, right? Because like we're anxious and we're hungry, so we want the answers, we wanted the story to be done and great, and Brad was not going to be prescriptive.
Yeah.
He was not going to say, do this here or do this here, but he was so attuned as a reader to this kind of like dreamlike state that maybe you need to be in to write an amazing, a brilliant short story, that he could identify places of interest where you needed to dream, like aspects of the story where you needed to dream or imagine or sit with it more. And what I learned from him a lot was how that required time, at least for me and a lot of writers, I think, and I learned how to be patient in that way and not to feel as impatient, with when the story was going to reveal itself to me in that way.
I have a vivid memory of him doing his teaching demonstration here. There probably were some people in the room, and we used it was a real live student piece. And he took a pencil. He had read it ahead of time, and he asked the student a couple questions. And he took the pencil and he put it right in the margin, this little dot. And he said, "This is the spot. This is the place I want you to go and walk around and think about for a while." And I think he got the job right at that point. Because he was very much attuned instinctively to hearing that music and saying, "Here's the chord. I'm right here. I'm right next to you." It was really quite simple, but he made it look easy. It's not easy, Kelly. But he had a great gift for that. Great gift.
There's a line and there is happiness, and I can't pull it up right now, but there's a phrase that comes back twice, the visible world, the world that is visible. And I think about how his work really touches on that there's the mystery of everyday living, that there's a world beneath the world or above the world or beside the world. There's always layers to the world. And I think that when we talk about dreaming and how do we incorporate that into fiction, I think Brad's work really, it's filled with such mystery, though, and acceptance that there are these other worlds and other perceptions. But yeah, that line comes back twice, even though it's like a serial killer story. It's so if you go in there reading it looking for a great dream inspiration, you might want to read something else.
Well, if there are no questions thank you.
I would love to know if there are any other Bradisms that come back to you as you're writing.
I have one, and it kind of goes with what you were saying about sometimes he could be frustrating as a teacher when you're seeking like a more prescriptive moment from him. But I remember, and I talked about this earlier today, I submitted a story for workshop, and when we were workshopping it, his feedback to me and like in front of the whole class was, you just need to blow this story up. Maybe you just need to throw the pages down the stairs and see where they land. And at the time, it was so confounding to receive that because I didn't know what it meant other than the story is bad. You need to just try again. But I think in hindsight, he was saying something about just like the way that I was approaching the idea of what a story could be, and the way that I approach stories from my life and put them into stories about other people's lives. But he was able to put that dot exactly where it needed to go. Oftentimes when you weren't kind of ready to receive that. So that was a Bradism that I still think about is you need to blow this story up. You need to throw these pages down the stairs. Yeah.
Cliff?
I love the similarity between Caleb's Cadillac story and Jenny's Meadow story. And it's like the wandering is so important. It's not the destination. Because the more you wander, the better you'll get there. Is that fair to say?
I mean, in conversations with Brad about writing, I think a lot of his sensibility that I get was about discovery, so like I guess to do that sometime. I mean, this is how I feel as a fiction writer. I have to do a fair amount of wandering to discover anything interesting, or worth writing about in fiction. So maybe so in that way, I think if maybe he knew too much up front, the story would kind of fizzle out, become lifeless in a way, right? Because there wasn't that sense of discovery and kind of exploration in the work, and that mystery that comes along with that, if that makes sense.
I think too, Cliff, we talked, and Nell will be wiser on this topic than anyone, but leaving the South and being here for 15 years, it was a kind of wander that I think he would say, we talked about it often, changed his work, as it changes all of our works if we come from a landscape and a culture with which we are so deeply familiar. And this is a different place. The light's different, the wind's different, the people are different, the way they speak are different. Carlos Del Rio Martinez has a great and terrible getting lost while hunting story, which is a little bit in the same vein of some of these other kinds of things. And I think that Brad was a seeker in a lot of ways. He and Nelji had a number of conversations, which they both found they made each other mad as snakes, I must say. But what a great pair they were too, I think, because they recognized in one another some really powerful urges to try to make art in really important ways. But I think being in Wyoming was a real change, and I want to see it as this is the place that gave to us, or he gifted to us aliens in the prime of their lives in this chain because he was living out here. But that may be that's how I wish to see it. Because he talked about he wasn't sure he could do it. He was like, I don't know if I can come out here because if I can't write, if I can't finish this book I'm working on out here in Laramie, it's going to be the death of me. But he did. He did great work here. So, in many, many ways. Let's continue our celebration. Thank you again for being here. Grab some food, buy some books, get some books signed, and just thank you and keep Brad and his work close to you for the rest of your days. Thank you very much. Find your seat, folks.